Here on The Colour of Country Life, always great to catch up with Thomas Elder Markets analyst Matt Dalgleish. How are you, Matt?
Good, Ricky. Going well. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. Look, there's a lot going on. We want to track through it. Look, on the domestic market, maybe we'll start with sheep. We've seen a downturn in terms of price, but what's feeding into that on the domestic front?
Look, for lamb, certainly there's been a bit of price pressure. What's happening now, I think there's still some ongoing issues with a few processes around the place. Not so much COVID issues, but more just general workforce issues. So a lot of processes are running, at low percentages, like around 50% capacity, and that's causing a bit of a backlog in some areas for lamb coming through. So that's pressured price a little bit. But I think over the next few weeks, as we head into that, more into the depths of winter in the south, we do start to see the availability of lamb tighten up. So that's probably going to put the balance back, and we might see some pricing start to creep up for lamb. For mutton pricing, that's actually been pretty strong in the last few weeks. So, that's kind of chugging along, but that's a supply issue again because of the nature of the flock rebuild. The sheep and mutton are a bit thin on the ground, so those prices have held up okay already.
That's good to hear. Let's just swing across to cattle. There's a fair bit more going on at thomaseldermarkets.com.au in terms of your commentary. Let's look at the US first of all. They're sort of in a reverse scenario to what we're in with our restock here. What's going on in America?
Yeah, that's right. They're in their third year of a liquidation phase. Obviously, we get a wetter season through La Nina in Australia, but in the US, it's characterised by a drier season, and they've had in some areas quite severe drought, and obviously the price of grain globally going mad is causing some pain in their feedlot sector. So the US experience is that they're destocking, and actually if you look at the data. So one of the things we look at is the female slaughter ratio in the US as well. How many female cattle they're slaughtering as a proportion of overall slaughter. And that's the highest it's been since 1986 when records began, so for that particular data set. So a very strong level of liquidation, and it's pointing to the US herd probably dropping the most it's dropped in 30 or 40 years.
Now, that probably doesn't feed directly into what's going on when it comes to Japanese demand for our beef, but that's been on the positives for us as well.
It has been, yeah. So we've seen a big lift in Japanese kind of imports of Australian beef into Japan just over May. So that was a good sign. And Japan being our number one destination, they've actually pushed us up to about 27% of the market share of our exports this year has gone to Japan now. So a good signal, and it started to put a bit of support into pricing. We've seen the ECI drift up over the last week or so, back up into that 11.20 area. So that's provided a bit of support to that export demand.
And what about there's some Bureau of Statistics data that's out recently on the slaughter level across both the cattle and the sheep? What's that telling us about, I guess, how we're tracking and where we might be heading? Yeah,
so the same kind of ratio for beef, that female slaughter ratio, we can do the same numbers for Australia, and we did that for the ABS data that just came out for the March quarter of 2022, and that's showing actually that it's the lowest that ratio, the female slaughter ratio, has been in about a decade in Australia. So that's showing that we've got a really strong rebuild underway. And obviously we're seeing that, the types of prices that restockers and people are paying for breeding cattle is pretty extreme, and that ratio shows just how it's a very strong rebuild, the strongest we've seen in a decade for cattle. And for the sheep, it's even stronger. It's actually, we call it the sheep turn-off ratio, so it's a different name, but it's the same concept. How strong is the rebuild? And the ratio for that's down at about 9.1%, which is the lowest it's been on record since we've been taking that data, and that goes back to the early 70s. So very strong rebuild for both for cattle and sheep underway at the moment in Australia.
Yeah, well, that constraining of supply is going to feed into price. Are you going to be bold enough to throw us a potential price where we might land on cattle or sheep on the indicators maybe by the end of the year?
Look, I think through winter for both markets, we do tend to see, particularly in the south, a bit of tightening of supply. So we will see. It's likely we see a bit of a price climb in the next month or so, but as we head towards the end of the year, I think and particularly for sheep and lamb in spring, we see prices come under pressure because of that spring flush. So I think when it's all said and done, I think we're probably looking at about from these levels now, I wouldn't be surprised if we see about a 5% decline by the end of the year in cattle pricing, and for sheep probably about a 10% decline because of that pressure of the spring flush.
All right, now Matt, just lastly, something that's sort of occurring to me as I do these conversations for the Friday Country Viewpoint program program is just, I guess, one of the things that's got to be playing in Australia's favour on international markets is just our relative political stability. We've seen countries in different commodities close off their exports. They want to look after domestic supply for food security. Is that making Australia an attractive destination for people to go looking for produce?
Yeah, it has. I mean, that governance issue and the comfort you can have in dealing with a country like Australia that's stable is always a good sign. But I think you could add to that, the level of biosecurity that we have as well. And people know around the world Australian product, particularly for edible products like meats, and we've got a very good reputation for safety and traceability, and that's also assisting. So it makes it more pertinent when we've got issues like foot and mouth disease on the border at Indonesia and this lumpy skin disease for cattle as well. It really shows that we've got to be very vigilant when we're travelling overseas and coming back and making sure we're not bringing stuff back with us.
Yeah, and also shows why Australia's being proactive in the sense that we've sent the Chief Veterinary Officer and the Deputy over to Indonesia, not only to monitor or observe, but also to help them get on top of it.
That's right, yeah. We need to do that kind of work in market. It's definitely money well spent if we can keep diseases like that out of the country, because it would be a disaster for our export sector and our red meat sector if it got in.
All right, Matt Dalgleish from Thomas Elder Markets. You can read more of his work at thomaseldermarkets.com.au. Thanks for joining us again today on Flow.
Thanks, Ricky. Have a good one.